Every F-35 fighter jet contains 920 pounds of rare earth materials. Every single one. And in September 2022, the Pentagon discovered that all 825 delivered F-35s contained a magnet sourced from China, buried 5 layers deep in the supply chain. The most advanced weapon system ever built, and a 5th-tier Chinese subcontractor had its fingerprints inside every one. And the story of how this happened involves a US corporation, a Chinese billionaire who happened to be Deng Xiaoping's son-in-law, and a deal that Washington approved with open arms. But we'll get to that. The F-35 is just the beginning. China controls 69% of rare earth mining, 91% of processing, and 99.9%, that's not a typo, 99.9% of heavy rare earth separation. The stuff that goes into missile guidance systems, jet engines, nuclear submarines. In April 2025, Beijing imposed export controls on 7 critical rare earth elements. Within 2 months, magnet exports to Europe dropped 75%. Ford shut its Chicago assembly plant for a week, ran out of magnets for braking and steering motors. Multiple European car makers paused production lines. A single Virginia-class submarine requires 9,200 pounds of rare earths. That's over 4 tons per boat. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has called it what it is: economic coercion. The phone in your pocket, the car you drive, the MRI machine that might save your life. They all run on 17 elements you've probably never heard of. And one country controls almost all of them. And starting January 1st, 2027, less than 2 years from now, the Pentagon is legally banned from using any rare earth magnet that touched a Chinese factory. The clock is already ticking. This isn't hypothetical. This is happening right now. To understand how the West sleepwalked into this trap, you have to go back to a mine in the California desert, and a speech no one in Washington was listening to. 1949, uranium prospectors stumble across a deposit in the Mojave Desert, a place called Mountain Pass, California. They weren't looking for rare earths. Nobody was. But what they found would turn the United States into the dominant supplier of the most strategically important elements on the periodic table. From the 1960s through the mid-1980s, America supplied 70% of the world's rare earths. 70%. And here's the thing most people get wrong. Rare earths aren't actually rare. Cerium is more common than copper. The name is a historical misnomer. The problem is, they're almost chemically identical to each other, differing by fractions of an angstrom in atomic diameter, which makes separating them extraordinarily difficult. There are 17 of them, and they power everything you use. Neodymium in EV motors, samarium in missile guidance, gadolinium in MRI machines. Nearly 46% of all rare earths go into magnets. That's the market. That's the bottleneck. And America owned it, past tense. January 1992. Deng Xiaoping, 87 years old, on his famous southern tour through Jiangxi province, delivers a line that most Western analysts dismissed as posturing. The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths. We must make the fullest use of our country's advantage. Now, when you first hear that quote, it sounds like Chinese ambition. A dictator claiming the next century's resource. Hold that thought, because by the end of this video, you'll hear it very differently. Scholar Julie Klinger at the University of Delaware has argued the quote was actually a warning about resource vulnerability. China had just watched Iraq get destroyed in the Gulf War over oil. But Beijing didn't hear a warning. Beijing heard a strategy. And one man turned that strategy into reality. Xu Guangxian, Columbia University-educated chemist, later called the father of Chinese rare earths, built the State Key Laboratory of Rare Earth Materials Chemistry and was instrumental in developing the processing superiority that would eventually bring the West to its knees. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Beijing declared rare earths a protected strategic mineral, barred foreign investors from mining, and offered up to 17% tax refunds on rare earth exports. The result? Chinese companies flooded the global market with state-subsidized material so cheap that no Western competitor could survive. Investor Chris Ruffle put it perfectly. They drive down the price against themselves, and then came the deal that broke everything. Remember that son-in-law I mentioned? Here it is. In 1995, General Motors sold its Magnequench division, the best rare earth magnet producer in the world, a strategic army supplier based in Valparaiso, Indiana, to a consortium that included two Chinese state-owned firms holding a combined 62% stake. The price? $70 million. The chairman of one of those firms, San Juan New Material, Jiang Hongson, Deng Xiaoping's son-in-law. By 1997, shares transferred to Onfem Holdings, run by Wu Jianchang, another Deng son-in-law. The equipment was shipped to Tianjin and Ningbo. By 2004, the Valparaiso plant, which made magnets for JDAM precision bombs, was shut. Let that sink in. America's rare earth magnet crown jewel, sold to the family of the man who said, "China has rare earths," for the price of a mid-tier Manhattan apartment building. Meanwhile, Mountain Pass was drowning. A 1996 pipeline leak released radioactive wastewater into the Mojave National Preserve. Cleanup cost over $185 million. Mining ceased in 2002. Former Molycorp CEO Mark Smith: "We toured them, we explained what we do, allowed them to take pictures and everything else. They took it back to China." By 2009, China produced 97% of the world's rare earths. 97%. From 27% in 1990 to near total monopoly in under 2 decades. For a decade, nobody in Washington seemed to care. Until September 7, 2010, when a fishing boat captain in the East China Sea accidentally proved Deng Xiaoping right. A Chinese fishing trawler rammed 2 Japanese Coast Guard vessels near the disputed Senkaku Islands. Japan arrested the captain. Standard diplomatic dust-up, right? China's retaliation wasn't military, it was chemical. Within weeks, Chinese customs agents quietly halted all rare earth shipments to Japan. Japan got 90% of its rare earths from China. An entire industrial economy held hostage by a fishing boat. What happened next was the first real demonstration of rare earths as a geopolitical weapon, and the price charts tell the story. The informal embargo lasted roughly 2 months, late September to mid-November 2010. 2 months, but the panic lasted years. Dysprosium, and remember this name, it literally comes from the Greek word for hard to get, went from $91 per kilogram to $2,377. A 26-fold increase in 31 months. Neodymium prices rose 750%. The average US import price for rare earths from China surged from under $7,000 per metric ton to over $170,000. More than a 23-fold increase. Do the math. That's not a supply disruption, that's economic warfare. March 2012, the US, EU, and Japan jointly filed a WTO dispute against China's export restraints. 2.5 years later, August 2014, the WTO ruled against China. Victory, right? Not quite. By May 2015, China removed the quotas. But here's the twist: it didn't matter. Beijing simply replaced quotas with a domestic resources tax. And by then, China controlled so much of the processing chain that quotas weren't even the real leverage anymore. The WTO won the battle. China won the war. The 2010 crisis triggered a gold rush. Over 200 new rare earth projects were announced globally. The poster child? Molycorp, the company that inherited Mountain Pass. Molycorp reopened the mine, IPO'd at $14 a share in July 2010. The stock rocketed to $79 by May 2011. They invested $1.7 billion in modernization, called it Project Phoenix. Then China dropped prices, deliberately, predictably. June 25, 2015, Molycorp filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, $1.7 billion in debt, stock at 36 cents. The mine was eventually sold at auction for $20.5 million, barely 1% of what was invested. This is China's textbook. Flood the market, drive competitors out. When competitors try to re-enter, drop prices to destroy them. Repeat. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's a business model. Hey, quick question for the comments. If you were running the Pentagon's supply chain, would you keep buying from China at a discount, or pay 5 times more for a domestic source that might not exist for another decade? Let me know below. Now let's talk about the thing nobody in the clean energy industry wants you to see. Baotou, Inner Mongolia, home to the Bayan Obo mine, the world's largest rare earth deposit, over 100 million metric tons of reserves, and next to it, a tailings lake roughly 10 square kilometers in area. That's larger than some European city centers. It contains over 70,000 tons of radioactive thorium, threatening groundwater and the Yellow River. BBC journalist Tim Morn went there in 2015. It feels like hell on earth. Dozens of pipes line the shore, churning out a torrent of thick, black chemical waste. For every single ton of rare earths extracted, 2,000 tons of toxic waste, 75 cubic meters of wastewater, 9,600 cubic meters of waste gas. Cancer rates near that tailings lake have been reported at 70 times the national average. Nearly every household in surrounding communities suffers from chest diseases and osteoporosis. Chinese environmentalist Ma Jun. We basically export the resources at a rather cheap price, and much of the environmental cost is externalized to local communities. Tim Morn again. Our lust for smartphones, flat-screen televisions, and ironically, even green technology is what's created this lake. The irony is suffocating. The wind turbines, the electric vehicles, the energy-efficient everything. The entire green energy transition runs on one of the dirtiest industrial processes on the planet. Japan learned its lesson in 2010, but what the rest of the world didn't realize is that the real weapon was never the mines. It was something much harder to replicate. Here's the insight that most coverage misses entirely. Mining is not the bottleneck. Processing is. The US mined 45,000 metric tons of rare earth ore in 2024, 11.5% of the global total. Respectable. But until recently, most of it was shipped to China for processing. Ahmad Ghahraman, a rare earth recycling CEO, nailed it. It's not a mining problem, it's processing and manufacturing. And in December 2023, China banned the export of rare earth extraction and separation technology. Not just the materials, the knowledge of how to process them. They're not just controlling the supply, they're controlling the knowledge. This is the trap. And once you understand how it works, you'll see why just dig up more rare earths is not a plan. Mining rare earths without the processing is like owning a wheat field with no flour mill, no bakery, and no oven. You've got dirt. China's got bread. From ore to finished magnet requires 8 distinct industrial stages. Mining, beneficiation, cracking and leaching, separation, which alone requires hundreds of iterative solvent extraction cycles, then refining to 99+% purity, metallization, alloying, and finally magnet manufacturing, a specialized powder metallurgy process that very few facilities outside China can perform. 8 stages, and China dominates every single one of them. 69% of mining, 91% of processing, 99.9% of heavy rare earth separation, and roughly 92% of global magnet production. Notice the pattern. The further you go up the value chain, the tighter the grip gets. Gracelyn Bhaskaran, Director of Critical Minerals at CSIS, told Congress in 2025, "Simply diversifying sources of mined rare earth ore is not enough to break China's stranglehold. Without urgently building global processing capacity, new mining projects will continue feeding directly into China's control." Case in point, Serra Verde in Brazil. Backed by the US Minerals Security Partnership, the only mine outside Asia producing both light and heavy rare earths, and its ore is locked into offtake agreements with China, because there's no non-Chinese processing alternative. MP Materials, the biggest US success story, Mountain Pass Reborn, still sent roughly 80% of its revenue to Shanghai Resources, a Chinese firm, for processing through 2024. America's best rare earth mine, feeding China's machine. And the West didn't just lose the factories, it lost the knowledge. The Ames Laboratory in Iowa, once the leading US rare earth research center, was hollowed out as the industry shifted to China. Now here's why this value chain matters long-term. 86% of EV motors use permanent magnet designs requiring rare earths. McKinsey projects global demand for magnetic rare earths to triple, from 59,000 tons in 2022 to 176,000 tons by 2035. The IEA says demand could be 3 to 7 times higher by 2040 under Paris Agreement scenarios. A single industrial wind turbine can require up to 1 ton of rare earth magnets. The green energy transition isn't reducing dependence on China, it's accelerating it. Now you might be thinking, there must be an obvious solution here. There isn't. Every fix you can think of has the same fatal flaw, and they all trace back to the bottleneck we just described. Just open more mines. The US does mine rare earths. Problem is, there's nowhere non-Chinese to process them at scale. Building a separation facility takes 6 to 10 years. In the US, permitting alone takes 10 to 15 years. Even if you break ground tomorrow, China's grip doesn't loosen until the mid-2030s. Which leads to the next idea. Just recycle what we already have. Less than 1% of rare earth magnets are currently recycled globally. 1%. Recovery technology exists, up to 98% rates, but the scale is tiny. You can't recycle your way out of a manufacturing dependency when demand is tripling. Fine, stockpile. Here's where it gets truly painful. The US Department of Defense sold off 75% of the nation's rare earth stockpile between 1993 and 2005. 75%. Sold during the exact decade China was building its monopoly. The Pentagon literally liquidated its insurance policy while the house was being robbed. The new Project Vault stockpile, $12 billion, announced February 2026, is a start. But stockpiles run out, especially when you have no domestic production behind them. Okay, last resort, just engineer around rare earths entirely. Tesla announced a rare earth-free motor in March 2023. Colin Campbell, VP of Powertrain, "We have designed our next drive unit to not use any rare earth elements at all." Sounds great, except ferrite magnets have 1/9 the magnetic strength of neodymium magnets. Professor Alexander Gabai at the University of Delaware. "I am skeptical that any non-rare earth element permanent magnet could be used in a synchronous traction motor in the near future." And as of February 2026, 3 years after that announcement, Tesla has not confirmed deployment of a rare earth-free motor in any production vehicle. Record Q3 2025 production, 447,000 vehicles, all conventional motors. Though there is an AI startup in the UK that claims to have done in 3 months what materials scientists couldn't do in decades. We'll come back to that. But first, what China did next made all of this worse. July 2023, China imposed export controls on gallium and germanium, critical for semiconductors, 5G, and solar cells. Exports collapsed within months. April 4, 2025, export controls on 7 rare earth elements: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. 7 elements covering everything from missile guidance to jet engine coatings. Direct retaliation for Trump's tariff escalation. And then, October 9, 2025, the real escalation. China deployed its own version of America's foreign direct product rule. Any product anywhere in the world containing 0.1% or more Chinese origin rare earths now requires a Chinese export license. This is exactly what the US did to Huawei with semiconductors. They learned from us. Under the expanded controls, Chinese nationals are now barred from supporting overseas rare earth projects without explicit government authorization. As of late 2025, 12 of the 17 rare earth elements are under some form of Chinese export control. Remember that 2027 deadline? Here's what it actually means. Starting January 1, 2027, defense contractors are banned from using rare earth magnets where any production stage occurred in China. This affects an estimated 78% of Pentagon weapons programs and over 80,000 parts. The Pentagon needs 3,000 to 4,000 tons of specialized magnets annually, projecting up to 10,000 tons by 2030. Current US capacity, approaching 1,000 tons. Think about OPEC in 1973. The Arab oil embargo proved energy could be a weapon, but oil had alternatives: nuclear, coal, conservation. Rare earths in high-performance magnets. Currently no viable substitute at scale. If you've made it this far, you now understand this crisis better than most people in Washington. And that's not hyperbole. So what's the West actually doing about it? The answer is both more impressive and more alarming than you'd expect. Here's the good news, finally. The West is throwing serious money at this. MP Materials. The Department of Defense invested $400 million in equity, becoming the largest shareholder at 15%, plus a $150 million loan with a guaranteed price floor of $110 per kilogram for neodymium praseodymium oxide. Apple added another $500 million. First US-made neodymium magnets expected from Fort Worth, Texas by late 2025. Lynas Rare Earths out of Australia. In May 2025, they became the first company outside China to produce commercial dysprosium oxide, a genuine milestone. CEO Amanda Lacaze. Geopolitics continue to be our friend. The EU passed the Critical Raw Materials Act. Targets for 2030: 10% domestic extraction, 40% domestic processing, 15% from recycling. New processing facility under construction in La Rochelle, France. Neo Performance Materials running rare earth separation in Sillamäe, Estonia, the largest such plant in Europe. The US Department of Energy, $134 million for a rare earth elements demonstration facility. Canada unlocked 26 new investment and partnership projects in critical minerals. And then there's Japan's moonshot. January 2026, the drilling vessel Chikyu departed to test extraction of rare earth-rich mud from 6,000 meters below the Pacific Ocean. First attempt ever globally. Deposits near Minamitori Island estimated at 16 million metric tons of rare earth elements. Though skeptics are skeptical. David Abraham at Boise State doubts economic viability without massive permanent subsidies. James Takune at Adamas Intelligence calls it a niche supply stream at best. Now, remember that F-35 we started with? the one with 920 pounds of rare earths and Chinese magnets buried 5 layers deep. All of this needs to be operational by January 2027 for the Pentagon to fix that problem. That's less than a year away. MP Materials is targeting 10,000 metric tons of magnet capacity per year by 2028. China produces 300,000 tons annually. All of that investment, all of those billions, all of that effort from the US, Europe, Australia, Japan and Canada combined. It adds up to roughly 3% of what China produces right now. 3%. MP Materials CEO James Litinsky. Regardless of which way this goes, Humpty Dumpty is not getting put back together again. Supply chains are changing no matter what happens. The West cannot replicate China's 40-year, state-directed value chain in 5 to 10 years. The question is no longer, can we match China? It's can we build enough independence to survive a crisis? So who wins this game? Now, before you walk away thinking this is the end of Western industry, there's a more complicated story here. And it starts with a professor named Eugene Goltz at Notre Dame. Goltz, who also advises the Department of Defense, published a landmark analysis showing that China's 2010 embargo was largely a dud. Companies found workarounds, smuggling undermined the controls, and the crisis itself catalyzed billions in global investment. His key argument: at no point was China's leverage over the rare earths market greater than in 2010, but even with such extraordinary market power, the embargo proved ineffective. So why worry? Because 2025 is not 2010. In 2010, China dominated mining, but processing alternatives still existed elsewhere. Today, China dominates the entire midstream: processing, separation, magnet manufacturing. The bottleneck has shifted deeper into the value chain, where alternatives are years, not months away. And China risks hurting itself. The global rare earth market is only about $5 to $7 billion, economically tiny. Every time Beijing weaponizes these elements, it accelerates the very alternatives that threaten its monopoly long-term. China Rare Earth Resources and Technology reported a 45.7% profit decline in 2023. The monopoly is powerful. It's also fragile. Remember that AI startup? Here's what they did. A UK company called Materials Nexus used artificial intelligence to develop a rare earth-free permanent magnet. They call it Magnex, in just 3 months. A process that normally takes decades, 200 times faster, produced at 20% of the material cost with 70% lower carbon emissions. And Google DeepMind's GNOME platform has identified 2.2 million new theoretical materials, 380,000 of them considered stable and synthesizable. This is the beginning of AI-driven materials discovery. It could make the entire monopoly irrelevant. But we're talking a 10-plus year commercialization timeline, which means the next decade is the danger zone. So where does this end? 3 possibilities. 1. Managed decoupling. The most likely outcome: 5 to 10 years of vulnerability, gradual Western capacity build-up, periodic crises every time Beijing tightens the screws. Expensive but survivable. 2. Acute crisis. A Taiwan contingency triggers a full rare earth embargo. New F-35 production halts. EV manufacturing disrupted for 12 to 24 months. Defense readiness compromised. This is the scenario that keeps Pentagon planners awake. 3. Technological leapfrog. Breakthroughs in rare earth-free magnets, deep-sea mining, or recycling at scale render the monopoly irrelevant. This is the hope, but it's the 10-plus year timeline, and hope is not a strategy. The rare earth market is small, $5 to $7 billion. The rare earth dependency is existential. The gap between those two facts is where the danger lives. This isn't a China problem. This is a 30-year failure of Western industrial strategy. The West voluntarily dismantled its own supply chain, shipped the technology to a strategic competitor, and now has to spend billions buying it back. When we first heard Deng Xiaoping's quote, it sounded like Chinese ambition. Now you know better. It wasn't a boast, it was a blueprint. And the West handed China every tool to execute it. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into the 4 companies that control the world's food supply, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments: managed decoupling or acute crisis.